So we've had the puzzler up here for a few minutes. Does anyone kind of brave enough to venture a guess at what the solution is? We have one. Yeah? The name of the method. That would be printed. Anyone else have anyone else think they're smarter than this gentleman? Any ideas? So if I told you that wasn't the answer, would that help? So everyone's as smart as this gentleman, even if I tell you. Okay. All right. No other guesses? Anyone thinks it doesn't compile? Since JavaScript doesn't compile, that's a bad answer too. So no other guesses? Nothing. Okay. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll kind of jump into things, kind of jump back to the beginning here, and we'll get to the answer to that in a minute. So testing in all browsers, kind of taking HTML5 to the next level or something like that. So what we're trying to do today is talk about all the things we're doing with HTML5 and all the innovations in the browser, but unfortunately you need to test those kind of everywhere, and talking about some tool chain to make that possible. So I wrote a Jenkins plugin that I've used quite a bit extensively to be able to test, writing an automated test once and then letting that run in all browsers. So I'm going to go through kind of a bit of that today. So a little bit about me. I'm the VP of Engineering at Just Me. Just Me is in the mobile social space. We do iPhone, Android, HTML5. For myself, I'm a Java champion, 3-time Java 1 Rockstar. So this is actually a Java 1 Rockstar talk. So everybody loved it at Java 1, so I hope you love it again today. Wrote a book, Web 2.0 Fundamentals, and I run 3 big user groups that have thousands of people. All meet at Google, the Java user group, the JavaScript meetup, and the Google developer group. So if you are local, you should think about attending those, and we run events every month. So, but the last kind of point there is I'm not a testing expert. I don't really, testing is not my thing. I'm a developer, but with a lot of the software I was building, I kind of felt I needed these tools, and doing a lot of innovation in the web, I wanted to go out and kind of, make sure that my quality was there and be able to know that it's there in all browsers and those differences. And so that's why I kind of put the plugin together to integrate with TestSwarm, and that's what we'll talk about today. So outline, kind of look at some background, look at some old school stuff, kind of look at some of the more modern stuff, and then kind of next generation stuff that I'm kind of proposing you work with and show you some of that. So puzzlers, how many of you are familiar with this book, The Java Puzzlers, from Josh and Neil? So it's a very, anybody read it? Yeah, it's a very good book. Yeah, Mahesh has. Yeah, so it's a really good book, very famous, and there's all these weird edge cases that all were in Java where you get these very, very unexpected results, and wait till you get closures, and then you're really going to be full of puzzlers. So there'll be a whole new book, I'm sure, on that. But one of the things with the nature of JavaScript, being a dynamic language and not being statically typed, there's so many more puzzlers, and the puzzlers just sort of, when you like I said, you get these results that are completely unexpected. So here's an example. And we had a few latecomers that came in. I'll put this up, and you can kind of think about and look at. I don't know if anyone else has any. You've had a while to think. No? Anyone? So I'll give you a hint, and that is I. So by default, variables are global scope, unlike Java where they're function scope, right? So the I is here within this AXYZ, BXYZ, CXYZ, is actually the same I as what you have over here in the XYZ method. So anyway, very, very confusing, right? So I can show you, whoops, not that way. I can show you kind of the QUnit test that shows you we were expecting the big long thing, but we only got the shorter thing. So there you go. So next, let's get to a little bit easier puzzler, and we'll ask you to let someone else teach me a little bit of JavaScript. So what is the length of my, I should say my array, huh? But anyway, what is the length of my array? If I say my var.length, and everybody sees that there's a trailing comma at the end, right? So how many people think it won't compile? Okay, well, good. That's a good. Anybody guess it's like undefined? 3, 4? He's thinking it's 4. Depends on the browser. It's 4. Everybody thinks it's 4. Anybody think it's 3? Yeah. So what do you think? Oh, shit. He's not as smart as he thought he was. I don't know. It's early. He doesn't know. All right. So the answer is it really depends. So if you said 3, you were right. If you said 4, you were right. Or we can look at the glass half empty and you were both wrong. I don't know. Some days the glass is half full. I think today it is, but because none of us are at work. But if we were at work, we would all say you're wrong. So, but here at the conference, I'm going to say you're all right. So the length in sort of a modern browser is very, very different, right? So I can take this here and show you exactly what I'm talking about in Chrome, just if you guys haven't used the dev tools. And then later, whoops, there we are. Later on, I didn't write a test thing for this, so I wanted to show you that the answer is 3 in Chrome. But then go run it in an older IE, like an IE6, and you'll get the length of 4 with the 4th element as being undefined, right? So I don't know how many of you have written some like a JSP or some FreeMarker or something like that to generate JavaScript variables and things like that. And you kind of do your variable plus a comma, and you do this, like I've seen this so many times actually out there in the wild. So I thought it was an interesting, very, very simple example to throw out there. Whoops. Let's go over here. So you saw the answer. So evolution of the web, we got lots of interesting dates. We get down here to kind of Ajax world in 2005. We start doing a whole lot more in the browser at that point, kind of making JavaScript kind of this dominant language, and then moving on HTML5 that we kind of have today and is pretty widely adopted. And just sort of show of hands, how many of you are doing a lot of web development every day? Good, good. Very good. How many of you are in testing? A couple. Very good. All right. That's great. And how many of you here thought you were in the Lambda talk? Nobody. That's good. That stuff's confusing. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about why automated testing is kind of important. And one of the things that I think is very important is that developers do their own testing themselves, and that's kind of what I think is important. So maybe you have a QA department, maybe you have a testing team, but I definitely think you're going to get a lot of value out of writing tests yourself, and it really lets you know the second something's broke. So if you think about kind of you're going out there, and if you see a test case failure, 10 minutes after you write the code, you can walk right in there and fix it. But think about exponentially how that cost of that, or the amount of time that it takes you to fix it. If you find it 2 hours later, you're not quite sure what happened. If you find it 3 days later, what do? You start pointing fingers. It's that guy over here. It's this guy over here. Couldn't be my code. It's a backend. It's whatever it is, and it leads to a lot of costs and a lot of kind of issues. So I think it's very important. That early bug detection is really a huge thing. And some of the other reasons I like it, is what we're doing is such bleeding edge in the browser. It's really, really important to be able to do that. And every time you write a line of code, to be able to know, does it work? And one of the things that kind of at the bottom that I think for me is very important is I want to be on the bleeding edge next project. I want to be on the next big thing. I don't want to be on the old legacy project. I don't want to be hung around with that. And so if I can give the next guy confidence to step into what I've built, then I can move on very easily. So Anyway, that for me has helped me kind of keep on the bleeding edge of what I'm doing at work, so that I can move on. There we are. So testing. I'm not the only one who thinks it's important. So Google has something that they call kind of testing on the toilet, and it's sort of you're at the urinal, and sorry ladies, I don't know what it looks like in the ladies' room, but and you're doing your thing, and you can see it up there, and you can read about ways of automating testing and things like that. So Google definitely thinks it's more important than concentrating on your aim. So here, the things I want to talk about is the difference between manual testing and automated testing. So none of us are monkeys and none of us want to be monkeys, right? So don't be a monkey, and every time you write a line of code, you're kind of clicking buttons. Sorry, I'm doing mobile stuff. I'm doing all Android now, so I don't want to be doing this all day or clicking. Kind of being a monkey, I'd like to be able to start thinking about the next task and let that run and come back and get my result. And the other thing I want to talk about is kind of the difference between unit testing and integration testing or functional testing. I'll go into that a little bit. So here we talk about manual testing versus automated testing. So manual testing has a great advantage that you can catch some visual things. So you definitely, before you kind of push it out the door, you need to do that. But it's extremely time consuming. It's very expensive. And people always say, I don't have time to do any automated testing. I don't have time to write tests. But if you think about every time you write a line of code, how much time it takes you, I can probably automate it in the amount of time I could test it 3 times, but I write more than like 3 lines of code. I fix more than 3 features. And so very quickly, you're getting diminishing returns by kind of standing behind that excuse. Another thing about manually testing is, because you don't have that time, it gets skipped, and you never test all the features, and you end up introducing huge regressions and a lot of kind of embarrassment. So automated testing, much less expensive. There's a one-time cost that's usually very small, it runs with no effort, and you can make that as part of your continuous integration. If it's part of the process, it can't be skipped, but it definitely some visual things need human eyes to make that possible. So there's a lot of ways to achieve automation. So how many of you are using tools, things like Jenkins or Cruise Control or Bamboo? Yeah, handful of people. So they're all kind of great tools. So let's talk about different areas that you can kind of put in hooks. So there's different things like SVN hooks, where you can say when something's committed. You can do it earlier, kind of at time of Maven. You run a build, you run an Ant script, you run a Maven build, and you can kick off some kind of testing. And when you do that at the Maven or Ant level, it can be really, really annoying, right? Because when I write code, it's 99% failure, right? My shit is failing until I'm done, and then I'm not writing it anymore. So what I find is often I know there's bugs, I know there's problems. You have to go in and constantly be changing add ignores and things like that. So I really don't like having it as part of Maven. Maybe it's an optional step, but I don't like kind of, that's the place that you run it. Next piece would be get hooks or subversion hooks, and kind of trying to catch these bugs before you share them again. But, there's no way to wait for multiple check-ins when you do that, and especially with Git, with local versus remote branches and things like that. It's not always the best. And the method that I prefer is using continuous integration. Something like Jenkins is really, really nice. So if anybody not familiar with Jenkins? No, a few are not. Okay. So Jenkins is just kind of a drag and drop tool, kind of a web-based tool that lets you run builds, execute commands. It saves the history. It has the logs. It makes them available on the internet so that you can have a build machine that does your builds and things like that. And one of the most interesting things that I did, so I've got 2 children. I've got an 8-year-old and an 8-month-old. I won't be able to say that much longer, but when my 8-year-old was born, I wrote a nanny cam as a Jenkins plugin. So that's 8 years. That's the first time I've ever kind of did something like that with Jenkins, and it was just basically using the cron feature to take photos of the nanny all day long and make sure she's changing diapers and feeding him and not holding him upside down like I do. That's only for Dad. But anyway, that's one of the first things I did with Jenkins. So it's good for more than just continuous integration. So now let's talk a little bit about unit testing versus integration testing. And I'm going to give you a really, really simple view because I'm not a testing expert and none of you are either. But unit testing is really looking, internally, calling private functions, kind of calling these methods that aren't exposed. It's meant to run really, really fast and have no dependencies. So not have a dependency on a database, not have a dependency on an external service, kind of mocking things out. Things like that, and you get a whole lot of value out of unit tests, as in comparison to an integration test, which is more looking at how all the pieces work together, looking functionally at how things work. They can often be very time-consuming. Some of them, for me, I think a lot of times it's sort of a 5 minutes or something, but some people get a little crazy and it's up 30 minutes or something. Is not that uncommon. So I see this, when I'm doing back-end stuff, I think the most important piece for me is often the unit test. But my own opinion is I get a lot more value out of integration tests the more closer I am toward the client. So I'm not sure how many people agree with that, but I don't know. Does anybody have any opinions there? Yeah, nobody knows? Everybody's afraid to say anything? So I'm going to look at some of the old school testing stuff. Kind of makes you want to, put your head through your laptop sometimes. But so here's some of the things that I've used in the past. So I used JSUnit many years ago, and it was sort of porting, JUnit over to the web, and it's kind of, you're in this JavaScript world, but you're trying to write Java in JavaScript, and I don't know, it just felt very, very unnatural. For me, especially the more I learned about JavaScript. There's a really nice tool, Rhino, which they talk about Project Nashorn, that's coming out, but Rhino is really nice because it let you have a JavaScript engine running in Java so that you could run unit test without having to launch a browser or anything like that. And HTTP unit was built on top of Rhino, but the one that I kind of liked the most back in the kind of Web 1.0 days was from Canoo, the Canoo Webtest. Does anybody use Canoo Webtest? No? Well, it's a lot of fun. So you should check it out. And this is what it looked like. So it's kind of an XML, like I think I'm doing some Google search here, and I want to invoke this URL, and I want to verify it has this title on the page, and then I want to find the Q, which is like the search box. And from the search box, then I can type in a value, click the button that says I'm feeling lucky, right? And verify that the resulting page has a title Canoo Web Test. So this is kind of an example of a Canoo Web Test. I actually did quite a bit of stuff with it many, many years ago, doing some JBoss portal stuff and things like that. Really enjoyed it. Here's I don't know, you guys can read that at another time. So Selenium, how many of you are familiar with Selenium? Right? Yeah. There's a lot of great things where using WebDriver to launch browsers and things like that where it's more centralized. So kind of progressing from some of this old school, getting a little bit more modern with Selenium. So Selenium, you have kind of this Selenium IDE that's like a Firefox plugin or add-on. And you can kind of right-click and say, you can add your test in Selenium, and it lets you write your test in all these wonderful languages like HTML, like who in the hell wants to do that? Java, C#, Perl, PHP, Python, and Ruby. But what language is missing? JavaScript. So all the JavaScript developers out there who are writing these great libraries can go and, write their test in HTML. I don't know how that's possible. But anyway, that's what Selenium is. And, it's very kind of a centralized, I guess I'll talk about this now. So this is what the HTML kind of looks like, right? So here it's the same kind of thing that I did with a Canoo web test. So it's an HTML table. Open the URL, type in Q hello world, wait for Wikipedia to be available in the search results, and then a search that's a hello world program, right? So that's what Selenium looks like. You can export it to Java, and it's just equally as bad as what you felt before. And this is kind of the model there. So they've got a tool, Selenium RC, which lets you run it in multiple browsers and multiple platforms, and we'll kind of talk about the problems a little bit, right? So like we talked about already, you can't write your test in JavaScript. So you're doing these great HTML5 widgets and things, and you got these great HTML5 developers who know JavaScript, and you're asking them to learn, Python or something weird to generate scripts, or Ruby, I guess is a better example there. So other problems, if you want to launch browsers, it's a very centralized system where you have to have a server that can have and launch all these browsers. So you kind of have to maintain that. Looking at things like now with the mobile, trying to do Android and iPhone, it's not possible with Selenium. It's really, really difficult. So they're making improvements to Selenium 2 stuff, but I think it's not really that good. You can't do any unit testing whatsoever. It's really looking at the screen and clicking buttons, and it's a black box testing tool. So you have no idea what's going on in the internals. Really, really difficult. So when I would do stuff with Selenium, I would add hidden buttons to the screen that like you got with the hidden, query string parameter, and do weird JSP includes to kind of try to make the ability to call private JavaScript functions and read values, and trying to hack in every way possible to make it do what you can do with tools like QUnit. So what is QUnit, right? So QUnit's written by John Resig, part of the jQuery. So we all know, everybody use jQuery, at least know what it is. Lots of fun stuff there. So QUnit was written there, with jQuery as sort of, hey, I'm going to build this great JavaScript library, but things like JS unit are not very good. And so this is an example of the output. So QUnit actually runs in the browser. So all you do is inject a few lines there, and you can run that. So we'll go through some examples, but this is basic output showing a failing test. Here that you have in the various assertions that you have. So here's a quick example of a test. So this is called my first test. Pass it a closure and say, okay, 1 is equal to 1. Does everybody know what the answer is? Everybody? And then the second one, 2 is equal to 2. So 2 is equal to the numeric 2, right? So let's close this one so we don't get confused. And here they are. The first test runs, and the numeric, whatever 1 numeric is equal to the 1 string. So did everybody know that in JavaScript? Yeah, that's very, very painful, right? So if you don't believe the test, there we are, true. And just to say, like, I'm not bullshitting you, like, 1A is definitely false. So, any questions on this kind of so far? No, very good. So jumping over to the next example, a little bit more advanced. So here we looked at different assertions. Here doing okay, talking about the first character is this. Third character, testing the length. So here you would find a test. So later I'll show this running in kind of all browsers, and we'll see how older IEs, you get different results than what you get in the modern versions. So we'll jump over and look at the results here. So there they are, right? And you can do things. Oops, I closed that other tab. The other test had a failing result, didn't it? No, it didn't. Okay. This one will. I'll show it in a minute. So this is our kind of third result, our third test. You can do okay, just hard code a false here so that you guys can see what a failure looks like. And there's the failing test. You can hide the passing test so that you won't see that, and kind of filter things down. things like that. So it's kind of nice. So that is QUnit. So, it's a lot different. Here you're writing JavaScript, something that the HTML5 developer very, very comfortable with, able to move forward with that, and in the language that they wrote, they can call the private functions that they have, and it's really the tool for the job, much more so than an HTML5 table. Yeah. So what the question was is kind of what's the how can I look at, is this different in IE? Is this different in Chrome? Is this different in Safari? Is this different in my Android's native browser or the Android Chrome? And with QUnit, you would actually run this. So you take this URL and run it on all of those. Oops. You can run it kind of in all of those, right? So if I go out here, we'll run this in Safari. Oops. And then you can get the same result in Safari. You can run it in IE. And that's very, very painful, right? Because you have so many different browsers that you want to test. And so I'll show how you can automate kind of doing that in all browsers. Or all that you'd like to test. How about that? There we are. All right, so how do you do QUnit, right? So this is kind of what the code looks like for doing that. So I have a JavaScript, I should look at this screen, not that one. So this is my test. The only thing I have to include is a div with the ID of QUnit, and that's where the results can go. Add their QUnit.js file, and that's kind of what runs it. And then this inject is something for TestSwarm, which we'll talk about later. So that's not required unless you want to take these results and ship them off to a centralized server there for holding kind of your results. So what are some of the limitations, right? So as I just showed, QUnit requires kind of a custom page for testing, right? So if I wrote some kind of a widget, I would have to write a web page to put it on, right? Because I have to be able to execute it with an HTML page. So that's kind of, sometimes can be a little bit annoying when I made a lot of like drop-down widgets and all kinds of different trees and all kinds of different things. And then you would have to, you just kind of build a little simple testing page for that. Another thing is if you want to run it on, like your live page, I would often include kind of query string to say test equals, and then it would include that, something like a JSP include, to include like the line of the test that you wanted to run. So what are some of the limitations, right? So if you're writing a Web 1.0 application, like QUnit is not the tool for you. Selenium is the tool for you because it doesn't live through page loads, right? So if you submit a form and come to another page, it doesn't, the JavaScript all reloads, you get a whole new test, and you can't look at the value you passed in, shows up on the next page, right? So it's kind of a major limitation. So I sometimes still did a bit of work with Selenium to kind of solve that. Another tool I wrote was something that ran QUnit test inside of an iframe, and you could kind of run test and things like that. So QUnit has no dependency on jQuery or any other library. It's a standalone library that was written to test jQuery, so you can test anything with it. Does that help? Yeah. So it adds methods like the OK and things like that, and test. So it spins through looking for all of the tests and runs them. So here's an example. Like I was fooling around with my website one time, and I added a query string to specify a test, and then I put the little div tag ID QUnit at the bottom so that I could see the results, and then you would actually see it clicking buttons on my website and then recording results down here kind of live. I should probably add like an example of that in the slide deck, but it's kind of fun where you see the page moving, and you guys have all seen that before. But just like I said, just add the snippet of code in your site, and then the query string to get at it. So now I'll talk about another problem of kind of waiting for things to bind and waiting for results to happen, right? So often, if I click a button and then something's going to appear, right, you have to wait a certain period of time, but you want your test to run as fast as possible. So one of the things you could do would be click a button and then wait 5 seconds and then assert the result, right? That's not so great, right? So a lot of the work I did, I used something from the folks at Append2. I don't know if you guys know Append2, but it's a jQuery's consulting kind of does support and things like that. I did a lot of work with them. And they did something called when available. And so that you could pass a jQuery selector, which is not here, but you could pass a selector, and when it evaluates to true, or when it's like available, when that returns a result, then execute the block inside. And then it has a timeout. And I looked at that, and they did when available, and I said, guys, I really want when true, when something is true, like, not just did I get a result, but maybe I can do some sort of assertion. So we made that available. They haven't really made it that available to the public. I don't know. I think you can probably find it, but they don't talk about it that much. But this is another library that you can use called FuncUnit. I don't have that much experience with it, but I've heard a lot of good things, and I recommend checking that out. So basically here, they've got an autocomplete item near the bottom, and you're waiting for it to become visible. So if you go above, they found the input, and they type JavaScript, and they're waiting for the autocomplete to drop down, and when it does drop down with the options, you're looking for JavaScript that has 5 results, right? So you can't, you guys have used autocompletes, there's some kind of lag before things show up. You have to wait for that. Another thing that's kind of important to talk about is you often have to wait for things to bind, click listeners and things like that. So if your test is running as fast as like a computer can possibly run, which is really what you want, it'll end up clicking on buttons before any listeners are attached. So let's switch gears and talk about kind of next generation. We want to be able to test this in all the browsers. So here I've got some kind of different things, Safari and Firefox and things like that. But really, you got all these mobile devices as well. So there's a whole suite of things that we'd like to be able to test it on. And even if you do have an automated test, running those would take you a very long amount of time. So talk about TestSwarm, which I've kind of lightly introduced earlier. So what TestSwarm is you can see in this diagram, kind of a server that sits out there, and browsers can connect to it, right? So browsers connect. So here you see all these, Firefox 3, 3.5, 3.6. Oops, they don't have that there, but and then ICE 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All these browsers are connected. So all you have to do would be, you call your mom, you say, hey mom, you got a really old computer, I'd like to know if my stuff works. Can you go to this URL? So all she needs to do is go to a URL, it sits on the page, and her browser will pull down to the TestSwarm server. And it's pulling to the TestSwarm server and saying, is there test available? Is there test, I'd like to help you test, right? And then a job can be submitted, and then it sends it out to all the slaves. So all the slave nodes then would run that test. Does anybody know how they would run them? Any guess? How you could do that? So they run it inside of an iframe. So if you think about an iframe is basically a browser inside of a browser, or a window inside of a window if you speak more JavaScript. And so they're able to run your test in an iframe, which has all its own scope and it's independent. So that helps quite a bit, and that's what makes it possible. Right? So here's an example of the dashboard, and you can see if I said, hey, you just wrote a line of code, can you tell me if it runs in every version of Chrome on Windows XP, every version of Chrome on Vista, and just go through the list and tell me if it runs in all these places? Well, doing this is very, very simple with TestSwarm, because all you have to do is go to a browser, go to a URL. You can have everyone in your team, you can send it out to your company, hey, can everyone go to this URL? So I can tell you when I first started using TestSwarm, I walked around the office and I saw a bunch of old machines. I said, hey, can I have that? That's not even plugged in. That's not on. Can I have that? And I kept gathering machines. And the reason I did this is because I wanted to run IE6, IE7, IE8, and IE9, and you can only run one version of IE per machine, right, without using IE tester, but that kind of gives you different results, so it's not really the right answer. So I ended up doing that, and so then I stacked all this shit up on my desk. It's very loud, like, you could barely speak, and a lot of heat as well. But I had all the dinosaurs of the company in my cube, so it was kind of fun. So kind of recapping Selenium versus TestSwarm. TestSwarm, there's no client config whatsoever. Just send somebody a URL, right? So, that's really, really nice. Browsers support, it runs everywhere, even mobile. There's no browser, any browser that can go to a URL can run an iframe, and you're in good shape there. It's open source. JavaScript support, so can you write JavaScript in the, for your test, and can you call JavaScript functions? Yeah, but not that much adoption, right? So TestSwarm was also written as a Mozilla Labs project, which you saw probably in one of these, in one of these screens, also by John Resig, creator of jQuery. So he saw the problem, I saw the problem, and thought it was a good idea. So Selenium, you have to have this kind of centralized server that kind of launches all your browsers. You kind of have to own that, and licenses and things like that. And it's kind of, I don't know, not really what I want to try to do. It's really nice to keep those apart. It's open source, but JavaScript support's really, really limited, and a lot of adoption there. Yeah, so all the QUnit stuff that for TestSwarm. So TestSwarm, so I'll show you kind of a link here TestSwarm can run QUnit, which is kind of what it was originally, a lot of the work, but it also supports running, you can read the list there, even Selenium. So my favorite is the screw unit, so that's kind of an interesting name. But Mocha and the Dojo, a lot of different options are available kind of in that area. So now we'll talk again about Jenkins a bit, scheduling builds, kind of both cron style, and it can pull your repo and kind of look at things like Git and say, is it time to run a build? Have people checked in code. Supports things like quiet period, where if you have developers who tend to like check in blocks, it can wait for 5 minutes and wait for all their check-ins to go through. Kind of happens a lot, especially with things like CVS, where you have different modules that have dependencies and things like that. So it can be used to deploy web apps to test environments, run integration tests. And for me, I wrote a TestSwarm plugin, right? So I was using TestSwarm. I was real happy with it. I was using it and then manually kicking off jobs. And I kind of got a little bit tired of doing that. And so I said, why don't I just plug it into this? I was already auto-updating my website. Why don't I, at the same time, run tests with it? So we're going to show a little video here that shows kind of using Jenkins with TestSwarm, and then a plugin that I wrote. So we'll kick this off. Get ready to enjoy. So here, kind of the first screen, you can see I have lots of different, so the iPhone simulator, and then we have Chrome, Safari, Firefox, and then this is Android. So I took my Android phone, all these devices, and kind of connected them to my server. Here you can see, actually is the iframe where the tests are going to be run. And then you can see kind of the results of it's been running. It ran various tests earlier. So here, if you kind of watch, you'll probably see, oh, not here. Oops. What's that? Sorry. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. It's there to run unit tests. So if you don't write unit test, it doesn't buy you too much. No. All right, so those are the tests there. So this is Jenkins. So there's the job. I'm going to open it up. And then here I can see kind of past results, right? So we'll go back just a little bit. Hopefully I can. Yep. So you can see what was passed, what was failed. I have the 3 tests that I was showing you earlier, passing and failing. And you can see the results over time for those of you who haven't seen Jenkins, and see kind of details of all those results. So here, down at the bottom, this is the plugin that I wrote. You see the 3 different tests where you're saving the results. So here you can configure one of the tests, define the name, kind of the title, and then specify the URL where that testing page is that runs it. And like I said before, the only thing that you do have to include is that inject script in addition to QUnit. And the inject script, could be used for Selenium or any other of those tools. So now we run the build, and then here, because all it's doing is pulling the APIs that are inside of TestSwarm. So here we can see kind of the results of the various tests, how it was going. Sorry, it's a little blurry. But, and you can see it's going to wait a few seconds, waiting 10 seconds, it says, to get the next result. On the right, you can see the test running. Now we're kind of looking at the results. Boom, that one just finished, right? So it's kind of, if you happen to open TestSwarm, right, you have a TestSwarm server and you have Jenkins, this window here on the left is actually the TestSwarm server itself. What you would get if you didn't use, if you just use it out of the box, you can watch it run and it finished. Now you see that test that right here, where'd it go? The test 2. Right? So this is the first test, the second test, and the third test. The third test always fails. The second test fails in IE8, but passes in IE9. Right? So there's where you kind of caught that unexpected behavior where you get a difference from one browser to another. There you can see who failed if you click on it. And then here you can actually see the results. So even though it was run in a browser, maybe at your mom's house, you can actually see the QUnit results from anybody who can access the TestSwarm server. So that's really nice that you can see that. So now we'll kind of click into that, open it up and look at it. These are what the results look like. You get those results. So is anybody familiar with kind of from here down what those test results are? What that format is? Anybody know? Anybody know? I don't know if this is the best place to see it. You'll see a little bit later. So this is it. The thing at the top will give you a good hint. So it's TAP. Does anybody know what TAP is? No? No? Okay. Testing Anywhere Protocol. So when I wrote this, I looked at using JUnit XML. And I had written an earlier version of a TestSwarm plugin with the old APIs, and it was kind of, well, actually it was pre-API, so I was actually screen scraping TestSwarm to make it work. And I don't know, someone said, and all I had, my output was just console output, and someone said, hey, you should integrate TAP or JUnit. And I said, what is this TAP thing? I've never heard of it. But it's basically kind of a standard for test results, and it lets you provide a lot more detail, such as warnings, and there's a whole lot more that you can do with it than JUnit, so I chose to have it output TAP, which is a little bit nicer. So, and I'll show you what those results kind of look like. You can do subtests and things like that as well. So this is actually kind of what the results are. There were 1 to 3 tests showing here, the first example, and then what the outputs are, the timestamps, things like that. So, and then lots of things can look at that. So, very good. So this is available in the Jenkins repository. So you can get it as part of the Jenkins, through Jenkins with, CloudBees. KK actually pushed the final commit for me before the Java 1 talk to make that possible. I had some problems. And here's the official Jenkins page for that as well. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me, Mark. So, yeah.